Welcome, Brian Mackenzie. Brian is one of the top health and human performance specialists, educators, authors, and public speakers in the world today. He has more than 2 decades of experience in innovating new products for research and training on the use of biological tools to achieve maximum output in training, performance, and recovery. He is the author and co-author of best-selling books, Unbreakable Runner, The Art of Breath, and Unplugged. He is also considered one of the top experts when it comes to breathing techniques to improve your health, athletic performance, and your life.
Hey Brian, it's nice to have you on the show. You're kind of like believe it or not, you're a little mentor of mine when it comes to breathing. But we're going to get into that, and we have a lot of mutual fun friends, so we're going to probably talk about that as well. But I got to start right off, and with your motto being human performance is performing at our highest biological potential. What a freaking cool motto, first of all. But where did this come from? And with all the fitness trainers out there and all the people in the industry, how did you find your niche and that set you apart, that makes you who you are?
Failure. I think it took me about 25 years to really be able to communicate exactly what it is that, and now I'm still working on it too, but what it is I've understood, why I got involved in this world in the first place, and I guess the health and fitness space, I guess you could say, in essence. I mean, that's where it kind of began for me, but sports were actually the kind of the impetus that drove this stuff. But I was a decent athlete, but I was a terrible student, and I just didn't enjoy the process at all. There were very few people that made it enjoyable or allowed me to critically think. And it wasn't until that I ran into somebody like that where it was just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, kind of idea. But it began with movement. Yeah. And I was basically, I was turning the housewives of Newport Beach into kind of monsters, and their husbands were getting jealous. So then I started training the husbands, and that's where I kind of started making more money than I knew what to do with. And then I invested that into a gym. I've spent more money than I'd like to admit on technology and toys. However, I've learned that none of it really has anything to do or is better than what we're equipped with. Now, the world needs us to communicate what exactly we're seeing. So using said technologies allows me in a way to understand data points to be able to share, hence why I've gotten involved in research and spent probably last close to 10 years around research. And so I'm involved in that side of it now too. So at any rate, it's been a bit of a process, but to prop the two of you up, I have long collaborated with chiropractors in my facilities since the beginning.
Well, I think Tim is one of them, isn't he?
Brown?
Yeah.
No, but we were tight friends. We became very good friends, and it was after the fact. But Timmy and I are good friends. But I started. Do you know who Chris Barney is?
Mm-mm.
So he's a guy in Orange County, pretty successful chiropractor, runs a great, huge clinic. Him I started with really, but then I had a couple of his proteges that actually started their businesses in my facilities because I would break them, they would fix them.
That's awesome.
Right. So
That's awesome.
let me ask you to be perfectly clear to the audience, because we understand what you're doing, but give me like the essence and the like in a 1 or 2 liner, what it is that makes you different as a trainer than anybody else.
I introduce people to themselves.
You bring them up to the mirror and you have them look?
Pretty much. But it's not the mirror that they're used to looking at. The mirror that most people are looking at is one of shame, guilt, productivity, a lot of this stuff that I was seeing through movement very early on. Like, you'd take a runner, and what I learned with running very early on was it was really just the destruction of balance, and it became, any form of movement really is the destruction of balance, but running was the fear of falling. And I could show people in slow motion. I could see it because I had been trained and learned and was able to see it through watching it. But slowing down the camera for people and putting it in slow motion, I could show them how they were stopping themselves and then having to restart. And they actually looked like wounded animals. By and large, most people look like wounded animals running. Not all. There are some beautiful runners out there. Take sprinters or world-class marathoners, etc. That said, you take any animal in the animal kingdom, the human being included, and we are the only one that has a bunch of different running patterns.
Interesting.
Every other animal runs the exact same way. A zebra runs like a zebra. A zebra walks like a zebra. Human beings walk very differently in very different patterns and very different functions, and we are not that special.
We realize that biomechanics, the study of biomechanics plays such an important role, but that's not all you do. Looking at biomechanics, what's one of the pivotal things that separates you again from
connecting the psychology to that. However, I do believe that psychology, I'm not trying to start fights, but it's largely a useless profession if you don't have a background in physiology. I've got some friends that are psychologists and psychiatrists and have a very detailed background in physiology. Most psychiatrists do, for instance, because they have to study medicine and have to understand the physiology and the mechanisms of it. But if you're just, like what I'm alluding to with the running or the movement is there's a psychological reason why you're stopping yourself from falling, right? While you're running, you are afraid of falling, but why are you afraid of falling? And in that, there's actually a detail inside the physiology that we're hiding from a truth that we really don't want to confront, that's probably and usually always much more deep layered than what is being portrayed in my life right now. Meaning it all stems from childhood in some capacity. Doesn't mean you had some screwed up childhood. It just means that you've created some protective mechanisms and some ways to survive as a kid in your environment. You use those currently in your movement, in your behavioral patterns. And so I was very good at, very early on, is provoking very high stress responses in the physical sense and asking people to move with conviction or integrity. And when they couldn't do that, I could show that to them, and then we would work backwards from that and start to integrate stressors where we're pushing up against the edge of that, to integrate better decisions about that and then reinforce the psychology behind it. I was doing this in a very archaic form for some time, but now it's really become an art at this point with, really why I said I introduce people to themselves, because people think one thing or they think they value one thing, but they really aren't putting their attention in that. They're putting their attention in a lot of other things.
Brian, it's interesting because I think you might have answered a age-old question I had about people believe that they know how to run, and that's the most primitive, or even walk. That's the most primitive function is walking. And I was taught in functional neurology that to get people to really show that walking is a sequence of falls that you catch yourself. And let's look at the biomechanical. So we shoot video of people walking, but they can walk and they're thinking about walking. If you get them to recite the months of the year or then every other month of the year out loud, suddenly they have to use executive level thinking, and you watch their mechanics fall apart. And you're able to go, did you have a shoulder injury? And they go, how did you know? Because it doesn't move when you're walking, right? Is that where we're going with this? Is that the kind
a bit, yeah. And You know, I think most things are a little, they're far deeper than people want to get to. And I've been able to collectively bring people to that place to understand it, whether that's over, you know, the course of a year or it's a few sessions, right? Like I currently don't even take a consult. It's you need to actually invest in a 1 month process with me, and it's going to cost some money because we are going to actually create something that removes part of the problem, but also begins a practice for you that you know how to integrate into whatever it is that you love to do. I'm not here to tell you what to do. It's introducing yourself to understand what it is you do. I mean, I was just having this conversation with my girlfriend who deals with a lot of nutrition stuff with people. And she's got a gal who's overweight, doesn't like being overweight, but you know, she wants to lose weight. And it's like, no. It's not the weight that's the problem. It's how you feel about yourself that's the problem.
Great.
You know, and she's trying to talk to her through this, but she doesn't want to hear that. You know, and it's like, it's a deep well. However, you are right, and it's like, yeah, confuse somebody a bit or stress them a bit, and then go, oh yeah, like, did you have an injury here? Okay, so yeah, you're protecting yourself from that injury, but why are you protecting yourself from that? And why didn't you get to the root of dealing with that trauma or that pain? Why are we avoiding something like that right now? And anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, what does somebody typically come to you asking about? You know, do they ask you, I want to run faster? Do they ask you, I want to lose weight? Do they ask you, I want to get bigger? What are they asking?
Most of the time, it's integration of the breathing gear system or breathing. So I developed a gear system within function, for movement, right? Think of it like yoga, sort of, but it's not. It's a whole different beast. Meaning, like, we go from gear 1 to 4, and I either help athletes, by and large, with developing a gear system for actually training them metabolically and getting their mechanics dialed in, since the respiratory muscles are always prioritized over every other muscle, and or breathing protocols or breathing rhythms. People come to me because they want to learn how to breathe correctly, or they want to get a special pattern to help them deal with stress. And that's where I actually go into, okay, so using breathing to just deal with stress is no real difference than just unwinding each night with a glass of wine.
So you within yourself, you popularized the principle of quality over quantity in the sense of building stamina and endurance. How do you approach somebody like that when you're telling them you need to breathe a certain way?
Well, I don't actually tell people they need to breathe a certain way. I show them what it feels like to do things differently, and show them how to actually engage things. Like for instance, let's get in. I'll just do a basic thing that happens usually, and I watch this all the time. Is people say diaphragmatic breathing? Oh yes, it's so important to do diaphragmatic breathing. Right. There's no such thing. Just so we're clear, that's a made-up word. That's made up language in order to create a hook line for something that doesn't exist. Everybody's using their diaphragm. If they're not, they're in an iron lung. And I think the three of us know what an iron lung. We remember an iron lung, right? Yeah. Like, sorry, that's not what's going on. And your diaphragm works. However, if you're laying down and you're just using your diaphragm, your belly just moves, but your intercostals aren't working, and those are part of your primary respiratory muscles. So now you're creating an incomplete breathing pattern, right? And when we're in a calm state, or we're just trying to be aware of our breathing, we're not consciously engaging our breathing, very little has to move. But if we have poor breathing mechanics, we tend to default that cage, right, in some capacity, usually front or back, right, like overextension or kyphosis, stiff rib cage. So we start to see some of these patterns that become, typical, that show up. So just getting people to start some drills while understanding, and one of the easiest drills to do is just touch your thumbs in between your intercostals and breathe into that. And you now breathe correctly.
Spencer.
Well, literally, it's like you now breathe horizontally. So now you're engaging not only the intercostals, but the diaphragm. So now you're actually filling the cage appropriately. Versus if I'm just sitting here and I just use my belly, well, now you aren't stable. You're sitting, and you should be somewhat stable sitting. You should be somewhat organized.
I feel like Brian went, Simon says do this. So I did.
So
do the, put your hands
people will come in and be like, yeah, diaphragmatic breathing's great. And it's like, okay, that's a wonderful term. However, let's get rid of the terminology. Let's get rid of the language. Let's just introduce you to feeling what breathing really can do for you, and where do you feel the differences. So do a diaphragmatic breath that you know. Now let's try this, and then let's try where we're just breathing with the ribs or we're just breathing with the shoulders. How does all that feel? And they inevitably come to the conclusion of, oh, let's go with the one where I'm actually expanding the cage horizontally.
Through the nose? Through the mouth?
Yeah, typically. I mean, 80-90% of all breathing should be through the nose. The nose was designed with the respiratory system in mind. The mouth was not. The mouth is an emergency reserve, and when we are communicating. So, I mean, look, you've got you've got as many hair follicles inside your nose as you do on your head. You have mucus that covers every single one of those hair follicles. That is your first line of defense for your immune system. That can provide a backbone for viruses and bacteria that could be 10 years later, right? So through the immune system response, you have turbinates, which are part of a filtering system where the air hooks and starts to spin, and there's 3 sections of that. Then you enter into the sinuses, which humidify and warm the air. With the mouth, you have none of that. You have your tonsils, and most of the air goes by that. So if you had your tonsils removed, most likely you were a mouth breather.
Love it. So, okay, when you get old like me and you got nose hairs, do you trim them? Do you advise people to trim?
Yeah, just trim.
Okay,
yeah, don't
so
pluck.
we're good.
Don't pluck. Trim.
We're good. All right, so we're good with that. All right.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, about 16 years ago, you started a controversial training method that became a marathon training. You want to share that before I do?
Go for it. Let's do it. So my pivot into my first gym facility was because I was having profound success with people mainly in endurance sports. And I had been slugging it out in the endurance world for a few years, doing the traditional long, slow distance approach. I had no life. My blood work was pretty terrible. I was basically becoming somewhat female. I mean, I just lowered my testosterone levels and increased estrogen levels. Not that, that is a bad thing, except unless you're male trying to train for things. And putting in the mileage, it was tearing me apart, and it was tearing most people apart that I came across. So I started playing around with and working through a lot of the background I had in strength and conditioning. I actually had some experience in powerlifting right out of high school. I just didn't connect dots immediately. So at any rate, I ended up synergizing a bunch of things through trial and error. I took a skill-based approach to endurance training by lowering mileage, increasing intensity, and actually killing a lot of the excessive training that was going on, but doing it with high-focused intent. Most of it, again, was skill-based, and this is where people lose it. They forget that was the actual, like we were actually doing skill development, drill development, and strength and conditioning exercises to complement that. Then we were doing high intensity work, whether we were doing short interval sprints or we were doing long interval work on one day, and then we were doing a longer duration work effort on the weekend, but that was always something that was never really too slow.
I like that. So that's where quality over quantity also comes in, is more of your high intensity approach rather than dragging things out.
Correct. And I'd probably make a few adjustments to that in the years since. Probably wouldn't be as much short course sprinting for some individuals, but there'd be a lot of walking involved in the days, either the other parts of the day or separate days. Yeah.
So you train for marathons. A lot of people have this stair step and they have to do these long runs at this particular time. Yeah, you kind of broke through a lot of that and became kind of controversial even back in in 07, like Spencer was saying. Mm-hmm. What protocols have you changed since then? What stuff do you still do that you learn that you haven't changed, and what stuff have you gone that didn't work but this does, and how have you kind of modified it?
It's the modification really is just I think walking is is the missing component, or walking or just easy like bike riding, going out and bike riding. If you can't walk, right? But if you're running, you should be walking. I think walking is largely the missing component to most people's existence.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't mean walking by taking your phone calls on a walk. I mean going out and walk and trying to be productive. Like, that's the problem I deal with a lot of my clients. Oh, I just go out and walk and take my calls. I'm like, no. You're now mouth breathing. You are actually changing how you're using energy at that low of an intensity. Over breathing is over breathing, and at a certain point, mouth breathing can be okay. However, at these lower points, I've looked at this metabolically. It is a completely different change if my mouth is open and I'm walking. So going out and walking helps with that beta oxidative state and actually a lot more of that mitochondrial biogenesis that we're looking for.
On that note, you talk about walking with your phone, or when somebody takes I walked and I walked my dog, and you look at their dog and it's like 6 inches, and you're like, okay, you're not really walking if you're trying to keep up those little legs of the dog. The other thing that I hear all the time, and this must drive you crazy, is people are obsessed with steps. I got my 10,000 steps in today. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but all you did is you walked around your office, and you think you're in shape, and all you did is 10,000 steps around your office. You never got out and did anything. Does that whole thing drive you crazy when people talk about their steps?
It doesn't drive me crazy anymore. However, I do talk. I quite literally put up a post this morning, and it's got the steps thing in there where I'm trying to count my steps. People don't know what they're doing, and so when they talk about I've got this many steps, I already know that there's kind of this separation of body and mind going on. Meaning the mind is actually doing things that the body's not actually communicating, right? And that's a pretty, that's a deep well on that. However, we are enamored with data to the degree that we do not understand that the brain and our mind developed out of a necessity to communicate with the body, not to be thinking about what's going on in front of me or behind me. And this is part of our problem historically, is that we grow up, but we drag a past into a present while trying to think about a future that we cannot solve because we're not present right now. And I try and introduce people to themselves in that capacity. And I've got a lot of clients that use data points, but they don't actually understand what they're using it for. And it's like, for instance, I got a guy who's enamored with his Aura ring and his sleep quality, right? And there's nothing wrong with this, to be clear. Like, I'm totally all for him doing this. However, I help him understand every time he brings this up that he's confusing himself again, because he's like, fuck, man, but he's like, fuck, my score is so low this one. I'm at 17 right now. And I'm like, so first off, your Aura ring's not accurate, just so we're clear, right? I'm like, get your heart rate strap that I made you buy, put it on, and we'll run Elite HRV right now. And I'm going to show you a completely different HRV score if I have you just lay down on the ground and in 2 minutes. It's going to be much higher than 17, okay? You're fixated on something that you think is now driving you nuts. It's putting you out of yourself, right? And, Aura might argue, well, oh, but it's going to help somebody understand some changes. Yes, it can to some degree. However, I've worn 2 Aura rings. I've also worn 2 Whoops. I'm very interested in the technologies.
Interesting.
I'm 2 different individuals with 2 different things.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
So you're not getting to know who you are by going in and putting yourself, oh, my steps, I got these steps, I made this goal. All goals, Bruce Lee right here. This is epic.
Love him.
Epic Bruce Lee quote. All goals apart from the means are illusions. Becoming anything is a denial of being.
That's awesome.
Master Brian.
Well, it's not me. It's not me. I'm not coming up with this shit. I'm just kind of this is what he meant.
That's great.
I'm attached to my steps for the day. What are you talking about? Go for a walk, get rid of your phone, and look around you. And absorb the environment for what it is. Is this where you want to live? Is this the environment you want to be absorbing? Because right now I live in LA, and in about 2 hours I'm down in Huntington Beach where we're moving right now. That being said, I didn't want to be here. However, I did it because this is where we were at, and walking around here and being around here, I'm very clear that this is not where I want to be walking around and absorbing the energy of this place.
Interesting.
I think you need to switch to about 11 o'clock at night, maybe midnight, then start walking around.
It's actually 4:30 in the morning. It's actually that's actually when I do go walk, and that's when I get up the hill, I'm good. But then I get back down around sunset, and it's there's still boom, 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 and it's no, I'm good.
Somebody else.
One thing I wanted to mention about the 10,000 steps that you may find interesting. There was an article published on I think it was in New York Times or so, but it talked about where did the 10,000 steps come from, that criteria. So they did a little investigation and found out that it was actually a marketing idea that came out of China from someone who was studying the use of a Fitbit or how many steps that you need to take. And they created a marketing concept set. And in Chinese, it was 10,000 steps. And that's what you should do every day, like drinking a gallon of water, which really makes no sense either, but that's a whole nother story. And they tested that out. There's no difference between 8,000 steps and 12,000 steps. It was just an arbitrary number. So everybody has used that as their, ultimate, health, goal, which as you dismantled that concept quite nicely.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
So another person that's been around forever that got a lot of attention during the last 2 years, and we're not going to go into the last 2 years. It's probably the healthiest 2 years that humans have ever had, right, Brian?
Yeah.
So, both mentally and physically. But
isolation doesn't work. We know that, and we don't need research to tell us that. But
come on. Isolation, not cooking, not moving, not talking is so healthy, right?
Yeah. So
a guy that got kind of popular, even though he was well known in our circle for years, is Wim Hof, right?
Yeah.
And so here all of a sudden people are talking about this crazy guy that jumps in cold stuff, and they're calling him the grandfather of the cold plunge and all that. But he really got people kind of, and maybe in a good way, talking about breathing techniques and got people thinking about breathing techniques, and yet he's been around forever. I mean, holds Guinness Book of World Records and all this kind of crazy stuff. What is your approach? Because a lot of people talk about and consider you breathing from your surfing and all that. How do you approach breathing different than him or similar to him? And how does that, what do you think about your passion of breath work? Did it come from him, or did it your own thing?
Yeah, I actually spent a considerable amount of time with Wim. I had a pretty tight relationship with him for a couple of years. I was actually the first instructor to teach with him internationally outside of his network. But Wim was arguably the most important person to breath work, because he came at a time a number of years ago when nobody knew what was going on with breathing. The only people who understood breathing were people who decided to go to a yoga class and they said, just breathe this way. However, most people in yoga, especially westernized yoga, have no clue as to why they're doing breathing or how the physiology of this or even neurobiology of it works. That said, Wim has a very potent tool for upregulating an individual that can then counter into a downregulation feeling, meaning you can feel really calm and good. Now, I want to emphasize he was very important, pivotal in what he's done. However, it is a technique, it is a methodology. Man created the method did not create the man. And people think that this is the way to a breath practice. And I know as many people who have messed themselves up because they don't know what they're doing with this technique. They don't know their own bodies. I get people all the time who come to me who are so overly stressed. They've been doing the Wim Hof method, and you're looking at their blood work, their biochemistry, and everything's in the red basically, and they don't understand why they're not getting better from this methodology. And it's like, you're starting your day by actually fucking throwing yourself into a high sympathetic state, and your nervous system doesn't know what to do. You're agitating your cells literally, you are agitating the cells, throwing them into hypocalcemia. You're screwing up the sodium pumps inside the structure of the cells. Now, a healthy individual, like going and lifting, is going to rebound from lifting. But if I have not touched weights, or I'm a hot mess, and I go in and do a little CrossFit, I'm going to come out pretty hot. Right. And so there's not been a lot of, unfortunately, there's not a lot of responsibility that's been taken on that side of the methodology. And that's not Wim's fault, I don't think. I think it's definitely the people that are surrounding him. However, he's not really running the business. That being said, it's a great potent tool to use. However, if it's something you're using every day, I can tell you right now, it's your drug. I've spent enough time around this, and I know what people are chasing. I've been around addicts, I've been around alcoholics, I've been around athletes who are junkies to exercise. People get attached to methods like the Wim Hof method and holotropic breathing very quickly because it changes how they feel. And if you're using a tool to change how you feel, you're never doing the work to understand what you feel. I feel that breath control's ultimate goal is awareness. That is it. Now, you can calm yourself down, you can ramp yourself up, you can create awareness, but where I really spend time is in developing resilience. Because the nervous system is so intimately attached to breathing in and of itself, and carbon dioxide tolerance is such a high level trainable thing that we can teach somebody how to develop a higher capacity for stress and tolerance through the mechanisms of breath control, inevitably that teach them how to be more aware of their breathing throughout the day, which is the goal in and of itself.
Did you mention something called holographic breathing?
Holotropic.
Holotropic.
Yes.
What is that?
Stan Grof created this in the 70s. So he was actually the first pioneer in the hyperventilation technique, other than yoga with like Breath of Fire and Kabbalah Bhati. But those are very, they're not long-term uses. Stan Groff created this out of a necessity when they banned LSD, as they were using LSD for, well, no, they were actually this is before, so like where we're going with psychedelics now, they were actually, he was using LSD to help alcoholics and drug addicts recover, or actually stop using, and when they outlawed it, he figured out a way to go into this, heavy duty breathing technique, and it can be potent.
Interesting.
Yeah.
On the same note, you seem to use a term or a reference to strategic parasympathetic breathing. Any relationship there? What does that actually mean to you?
That strategic, I would say, look, any sort of breath control where you are slowing your breathing down is going to bring on more parasympathetic activity. We know that the inhale is sympathetic in nature. So when I inhale nose or mouth, that's a sympathetic response. So the diaphragm's engaging. I'm elongating the heart. The brain sends a signal to the heart to speed up, right? When I exhale, that heart comes back down, and it doesn't need to do as much. It slows down, right? So if I extend my exhales, I actually inhibit sympathetic activity. So the parasympathetic nervous system it's not a like, oh, I want to engage my no, just take your foot off the gas pedal, man.
Yeah.
Like, take your foot off the gas pedal. And this is where it's like I introduce people to themselves. Hey, man, why are you trying to do emails when you're at the gym? Why are you answering messages or looking at Instagram during recovery periods of the gym? We know that your visual system has 40% dedicated space in the brain, and if you're sending a signal to your brain to high focus and do and engage in likes and what's going on Instagram, you're not recovering. You're not actually invested in what you're doing right now. We know that for a fact. Let's change that. How about you start getting invested in you?
Yeah.
And let's see what happens.
That's fantastic. Good.
So good. As it turns out, when I was looking at some of the people you work with and I actually talked to them, one of your clients was on our show, and Laird Hamilton. And
I'd say Laird was more of a tight friend and training partner, but yeah, I did some work with him.
And he's awesome. And I work at Pepperdine, and he's been working a lot with our athletes at Pepperdine to try and help them in their breathing techniques. And especially the art of holding the breath and all that kind of stuff. And you co-authored the book, The Art of Breath, which we're going to put a link to because it's a phenomenal book. What is your so for the people listening that are just sitting on the couch and are getting inspired by your intellect, what's some, a minimum recommendation for daily breath work that the average person should start right now and start doing to get their awareness going in the right direction?
5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening.
Of doing what?
So if you go to shiftadapt.com/breathwork, there is, I have taken the responsibility of popularizing an assessment that I ripped off from the freediving community. It's we call it the CO2 tolerance test, but it's an exhale test. So it's a starting, and there's directions and everything there. This is all free. This is why I'm going there. You go there, you learn how to do this assessment, and you exhale, and you see how long you can exhale. Then you take that time that you exhaled and input it into the calculator. You can match it up to times that you got to specific rhythms that are in those calculators. I would start at the rhythm that you match up to, and by inputting the number, and it'll calculate. So if you got a box breathing, or we call it a cadence, I think it's cadence 1B or 1C, which is box breathing. So it's an equal inhale, equal hold, equal exhale, equal hold on the end. The traditional box breathing is 4-4-4-4, right? That is, I have found to be a fallacy inside how we operate. Meaning, you know, if I said, all right, Terry Spencer, inhale, hold your breath. We're not going to get the same breath hold time, right? One guy's going to hold it longer than the other, whoever that is, doesn't matter. And if I did it with you, we're going to have 3 different breath hold times, right? This all has to do with where our nervous system's at and how tolerant we are of carbon dioxide. So how sensitive our chemoreceptors are to CO2. So this has to do with how we manage stress. If I don't manage stress well, or I in any way, and let's just say, oh yeah, I manage stress real well. Like these are my type A's, right? Like the highest level CEOs that I work with that are running major corporations, etc. Yeah, I do everything. Okay, give me your assessment. And I've got them, and they're below 30 seconds. I can tell you right now, they're fried. They're either not real tolerant, or their nervous system is just spun out. And in either case, this is a very trainable thing by bookending somebody's day with 5 minutes. So I'm a type A, right? If you can't tell. However, I'm a little introverted. Even though I can get in front of the camera and go out and publicly speak, I've worked on this stuff. However, in the morning, what I do when I get up is I go lay down and I actually do a 20 to 30 minute breathing session. That started with 5 minutes, right? But I do 20 to 30 minutes to get myself down. I don't go up. I'm an up guy. A type A doesn't need to be going and hyperventilating and getting ramped up the first thing they do in the morning. By and large, we want to get people like that, such as myself, calmer, to be more aware of how they feel and what's going on and what they really need to be doing or want to accomplish right now, right? Getting them more present. So starting their day with 5 minutes and ending their day with 5 minutes, preferably after screens, etc.
Does this have any bearing on why you swam with or dove with great white sharks?
No, that was Andrew Huberman's idea. And I'm sure you guys are aware of, you know who Andrew Huberman is at this point.
Right.
So he found me in looking to add some stuff I was doing into research at his Fear Lab that he had designed, and part of that was swimming with great white sharks in a VR setting. So you were with dogs, you were at heights, you were with sharks, you were with snakes, etc. Blah blah blah. Right? Well, the only way to get the footage of the great white sharks is to actually swim with the great white sharks, and there's some guys who do that. And you go, and he was like, "So we need to get more footage. Do you want to come with us?" I was like, yeah. And he goes, so check this out. And Andrew and I are cut from the same cloth. We grew up very similarly. That said, so we get along real well. We're very close friends. And he's like, hey, I've got 3 tags to cage exit so you can swim. So we can get out with the guys who are actually filming. And I was like, in. He goes, okay, so you need to get certified, dive certified. And I was like, all right, but I'm living in the middle of Oregon right now. He goes, figure it out. So I went and I got dive certified in a lake to go cage exit with great white sharks 40 feet down in the ocean. And it was a hell of a time. Now, that was, we did use the breathing exercise. We were actually testing and doing some breath work with the whole crew and seeing how it progressed over the 3 or 4 days we were there.
What did you find?
We saw an increase in the stress as we got further down the road. Yeah.
How did you calm it down?
Well, that was just the breathe. I mean, that all you can do, especially if you're on a mask. I mean, you're mouth breathing, but if you don't slow it down, it's really interesting, man. I mean, because your first time around those sharks, even just being in the cage and seeing, you get into this thing and there's there's 5, 6 great white sharks just swimming around and you're like, that is a dinosaur. That's not I've swam with sharks like Galapagos, reefs, all that stuff. A great white shark is a dinosaur. You are like, that is the size of a car. I don't stand a chance. That this is a very, very real situation because of the sheer size of these things. However, you come to terms with it if you're paying attention that they're really just a curious animal. Right. And when they understand you're not food and they're getting food, they're just quite curious. So when you get out of the cage, they're really confused as to why you're not running or freezing, right? Which is, if you behave like prey, you're going to get treated like prey. So keeping your shit together is pretty important. And the irony, well, maybe not the irony, but like the funny thing about this is that we're the same way. You walk into a bar and you behave like an idiot, you're going to get treated like an idiot. Right? Like,
so good.
Right, but now you're in front of a dinosaur that could, you're done. There's nothing anybody's going to do, especially since you're 200 miles off the coast of Mexico. You have to have some tools in order to regulate in some capacity. And if you don't, you're freezing up and doing really, you're behaving pretty poorly.
So I was going to ask you where you did your shark dive. You're off of Mexico?
Yeah, Isla Guadalupe.
I did the same. I did a great white shark off of the coast of South Africa. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's supposed to be even more intense.
Yeah, it was
so
pretty
Brian,
cool.
you brought up all right, here you are with a mouth breathing apparatus that is contradictory to what you've ever what you completely stand for. You're trying to calm yourself down. Obviously, you figure out a way to do it. But have you? Well, let me ask you this: did you ever tape your mouth when you're sleeping?
No.
You know that
no.
That's like the thing now. Everybody's doing. Right?
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah. I actually had a buddy of mine who's pretty famous. Like, he's now doing this whole nose breathing thing, but he's getting sponsored by this mouth tape company. He's like, "You want me to introduce you to him?" I was like, "No, I'm good. I don't need to do that." It's not that it's not necessary. It can be helpful. However, it can create some poor patterns in that. What are you doing outside? Like, look, sleep is about the other 16 hours of the day, okay? When you're not in bed. What are you doing outside of it? What are you doing when you train? I understand how the tongue works. I understand how breathing works. And I've applied, as I started, I was talking about earlier, there's a gear system we developed. And part of that is doing a lot of gear 1 and gear 2 training, which is nasal breathing, gear 1 and 2. Gear 3 is a nose in, mouth out. Gear 4 is mouth in, mouth out. But gear 1 is an equal inhale, exhale while you are actually working, or you have some metabolic output occurring. Gear 2 is a power nasal in, power nasal out. So it'd be something like, a gear 1 would look something like, right? Gear 2 would be more like, right? Most people are doing gear 2 work when they go and learn this whole nasal breathing thing. Gear 1 is actually where the sweet sauce is, and where we're actually going to probably start to see most of the research and data that's going to come out. And I'm actually working to get some stuff done right now with the UFCPI and potentially somewhere else as well, another institute. But we're seeing that there's actually, the brain has more to do with why I'm using frequency and tidal volume. But what's interesting and what I've seen from in analyzing fighters, especially when we put them under metabolic carts, is you'll see if you leave them to their own devices for a 5-minute interval, right? Like, you give them like an 80% effort for 5 minutes, and they go in there and you see their breathing patterns. And their breathing frequency is pretty high, and their tidal volume's it's nothing special. It's right around 30, 32 liters. Or 3 to like really around 3 liters, right? Or 3.2 liters. When you actually get them into a gear 1 that matches up with how well they tolerate carbon dioxide and have them work at the exact same rate, you see the breathing frequency drop to the floor, and you see tidal volume go up to above 4. So you see 4 to 4.2 liters that are now moving, right? And that tells us that we are seeing a change in respiratory musculature. So we're not getting that blood stealing effect or the metaboreflex that's going to kick in earlier, to where we start stealing blood from the extremities and starts diverting towards the respiratory muscles early, because I'm not breathing well, right? And the whole thing plays itself out in that it's really just a sensitivity to the brain. Like, how sensitive am I to CO2, and how sensitive is my nervous system right now? Because the panic switches start hitting sooner when I'm more fried, right? Like, if the three of us are spun out, been working hard for a few days, we're moving like I am today, I go home and things aren't going well at home with the family, whatever, right? That compiles over a few days, and then you're asked to go do something that's really hard to do, or that's challenging. You're going to lose your crap real quick, right? Breathing's right there with that.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing, is that if we can actually get that control, we're teaching people how to actually use their primary breathing muscles for longer periods, and we're really developing that, which is also keeping them more aerobic in nature. Meaning, yeah, they could get a little outside of aerobic activity or beta oxidation with this. And in fact, a very trained gear 1 can get very far out of it, but most people are not going to, like, when they start in a gear 1, they're going to be pretty low level aerobic. We're dealing with some aerobic stuff.
What's gear 3 and 4 look like?
Gear 3 would be or swimmers, we have swimmers use a reverse, but I actually use a reverse because I've just got, my nose has been really, I mean, you can see my nose is pretty banged up. And I could function in highly specific stuff at 96% of max heart rate in gear 2. So
Gear 4?
Gear 4 would be mouth in, mouth out.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought.
Right?
Okay.
It would be a hyperventilation technique, but it's not hyperventilation when the metabolic demand is up. So when we have excessive hydrogen and we've got CO2 offloading, it's not hyperventilation, right? So what is necessary, right? Or what do we really need to be doing? And by and large, most people are over breathing in most fitness activities that they're doing. I actually did a big post on this stuff, followed up because Andy Galpin, who's a co-author of mine, and Unplugged, the book I did, he was on Huberman's podcast. They discussed this at large with the gear system on how to use. So I did a post on this where we have all the gears lined out, and then I have each gear after that on separate days, explain how to use, etc. People can also come in and, go through our training, etc., to understand this a little deeper.
Brian, I love your energy. We're gonna change. We're gonna switch gears now. Probably gear. You might need gear 4 for my rapid fire questions. Are you ready, Brian? We got a set of 5 questions, and I always say, just give me like the quickest, best answer. But we always get hung up, man, because people say some interesting shit out there. So, all right. Gear 4, rapid fire, baby. Here it is. Best biohack you have discovered that everyone should try.
There is no hack.
Oh, okay.
There's no hack.
All right. It's hardcore.
Invest in the only I don't believe there's a single hack that exists. You cannot hack this. There's nothing that can improve this. Nothing. We don't know how it works in its entirety. We are not even scratching the surface of what our potential is, biologically speaking.
Love it.
Question number 2.
Yeah.
When you are in a rut, 3 best recharge exercises to get yourself going again.
Take a nap.
Love that one.
Like that one.
Do a little breath protocol if I can't take a nap. So I will do some sort of down regulation breathing instead, or I will divert to doing, and this is what I believe is the greatest use of strength and conditioning, is I will utilize strength and conditioning for recovery. So that doesn't mean going and hitting it hard, doing like a CrossFit workout, although I'm all for CrossFit. That being said, I'm talking about more along the lines of like a light to moderate weight for hypertrophy for 2 to 3 sets, and picking 3 to 4 exercises that your body's used to or can handle. And if you do that, you will create a neuroendocrine response that will send you into an anabolic mode instead of a catabolic mode.
How many repetitions? You said 2
anywhere from 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 reps.
Love it. All right.
Yeah.
Question number. Oops, I almost gave you a middle finger. Question number. my finger got stuck. Sorry. Question number 3.
Yep.
Best tip for jet lag.
It depends on when you land. So couple things. So I have clients who have their own planes. They also have altitude machines, every one of them usually. So I will have them they'll use an altitude machine prior to landing, because they're all pretty used to the training. We do a lot of intermittent hypoxic training. So I will have them do a protocol before they land, but if you don't have access to doing something like that, the light is actually the next best thing that I use, meaning you need to get that outside light, whether it's morning is most important, but evening, if you land in the evening or afternoon, you need that light. Your brain knows what that light is anywhere on this planet. So the sooner you get that light into your eyes, your brain starts to make the adjustments. This is the work of Andrew Huberman.
And you are referring to sunlight, not the
correct.
Okay,
Correct. Yeah. So if you land at night, there's nothing you can really do about it. Do not just start flipping switches and lights. Try and keep the lights honestly, try and keep them down as much as you can. In fact, sunglasses in airports if you're at night, and then so here's another trick. You want to like you want to change like at night. So I cannot stand the beams of lights. I get uber sensitive to it. I'll put on sunglasses at night when I'm driving, and you can see just fine. And I literally start to downshift within 5 minutes. Like my body starts to calm down and downshift. But when I'm in those lights, right? So it's like you don't want to put yourself to sleep, but if you know when you're going to get home, getting those glasses on will help. So light becomes probably the fastest, easiest thing to do. Or a breathing protocol of some sort, depending upon what you're gonna land with.
Gear 1. Breathing.
Gear 1 if it's at night. However, you could do a little Wim Hof if you can get away with it if it's the morning, right? Because you need to be up, right? So you want to upregulate.
Love it. Question number 4. You've been on hundreds of podcasts. I mean, what is one question you have not been asked that you wish you had been asked? Is there?
I've actually, I'd say in the last 6 months, I've had some of the best questions that have come at me. I can't really think of it, to be honest. People, like this podcast. I mean, you guys are asking some real questions and wanting to talk about some real things. A lot of people have in the past either wanted to talk about breathing specifically, just breathing, and what's the best protocol, and it's just like what's the best training thing, and that's great, but that doesn't work for everybody. So it's one protocol can't fix you.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because while you're thinking about special questions that people ask, this is a more direct question that you can answer. What's the craziest thing you've done naked?
He doesn't even smile. Look at him. He's all thinking.
Yeah. There's a bar down in Newport Beach. I think it used to be there. It's not there anymore. It's called Sharky's. I got 86 from that in my early 20s for full nude. I got full nude.
Let me ask you this: Has that question been asked on any other podcast?
No.
All right, then we got something good.
And I'm not scared.
You were not. I mean, you looked at like that question like you looked at the shark in the mouth and go, "Bring it on! I'm not prey."
What's even funnier is that when he had that moment where he looked away, I go, "This dude's thinking of a list of the things he's done naked." He's picking. He's picking which one.
Yes. There was a time I was naked a lot. At times not here as much anymore, unless I'm in the house. But yeah.
Brian, that's fantastic.
You know what? I gotta say that, you know, Spencer's always blowing this up and going, oh, this is my favorite podcast. I mean, I think every other podcast he mentions this is my favorite one, but this has got to be one of my favorite podcasts, buddy. And we have so many questions. I still have a bunch more that I have going on, but we don't want to hold your time, and especially if you have to move down there. So I'm gonna beg and plead that maybe we can get you on for a part 2 down the road, and
certainly,
and bring it back. But I do want to ask you, one of the things that I saw that you recently posted. I'm personally not a fan of the word try. I just think that leaves too many outs. You're not a fan of the word hope.
Correct.
What do these words have in common? Why don't you like them? And what are some better, healthier words to use?
Well, as Nietzsche in that quote that you're referring to is, hope is probably the worst of all evils of man because it prolongs the torments of man. Right? I'm paraphrasing, but hope is really a fallacy. You're attaching yourself to an outcome and hoping it goes in your favor versus being outcome independent, which is the only freedom you'll ever know. There is no other freedom. We can confuse ourselves with this country and everything. I'm a fan of this country. I don't want to live in any other country. I've traveled the world. However, look, man, I work in prisons. And I talk to guys like this who are doing multiple life sentences. There is only one freedom, and that's between here. And the moment you are attached to what the outcome is of what you're doing, you no longer have freedom. And that is what try and hope elude you to. You're doing or you're not. And you are either taking care of yourself or you are not. And the world no longer needs anybody who's not valuing themselves trying to help the world. We are a sick society that is a bunch of codependent, just wannabe fixers who don't know how to actually care for themselves and think well of themselves. I'm tired of dealing with that. So that's what my practice and my work is about. I don't need to get on a soapbox and go out there and tell everybody they need to be doing this. I just go do my work, and you can purchase my time for that, or you can come to our seminars, or you can listen to me on your guys' podcast. But I am about this whole notion of true freedom and connecting people to themselves, not disconnecting them.
Couldn't have said it better. What a great way to end, because that is the message of all messages. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
That's the way I want to end on this one. And thank you so much for your time, buddy. I appreciate it. For you just emphasize, for a guy that's truly busy, there's always time to help other people. So I appreciate that.
Let this spin your head. I am time. You are time. There is no such thing. Time is we are a species who has figured out how to measure something that doesn't exist.
Like an oral.
I am time, and if I value myself and what I'm doing, I'm here to show up. I said I'd be here. I am here. If I'm not here and I'm doing something else, hey, I'm good. You guys go have a great day. Like, no, I don't need to be here, but I'm here, right? You're here. You brought me your time. You brought me your presence. You brought me good questions. You wanted to do this. I enjoyed it. I'd be happy to do this again, especially like, with what you guys do professionally. Let's talk about that and how we, what I do, how that works with what you do. And, it might be a fun thing for everybody to hear since, you guys work outside of the podcast as well.
I love that.
Stuff,
and
thank you.
And you and I are close in direction. I'm only a little bit north of you, so we're going to have to hook up someday, and we have a lot of mutual friends. So I appreciate your time.
Love to.
And we'll hang out for the rest of the stuff on part 2. But Brian, have a great day, man.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed, and make sure you follow our Instagram at Crackin Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.